Alright, welcome to our third video. Cheers to you. I hope that your journey is going very well. So hello again, my lovelies. You might have noticed that we had a little break this time around from at least a video. I felt like the last one was very long. I'm going to do my best to keep this one shorter because I value your time as much as I value my own. And a couple things to start with. The title of this video, Blood, Protection, and Spirits, is meant to get at the heart of some of the subsistence patterns that kind of match historically this time of year, and some of the ways in which those patterns lay with this period of increased darkness. And but before we dive into that, one thing I want to draw forth a little bit that I think is important for us to think about is that we're wanting to move a little bit away from the idea of performing identity as it relates to the ancestral, and towards living in the struggle or relation with one's place directly. And the reason I say this is because there's a lot of buzz over the last several years about ancestor work. But a lot of times it can be in the direction of fetishization of genealogy. And by that I mean that we do want to pay attention to the way in which our understanding of our heritage overlaps with our experience of our sense of our the ancestral patterns and work and the ancestors that we work with. However, at the same time, we want to realize that we are important, that there's an important lineage of which we are a part. And I was having a conversation with someone that I do some mentoring work with about there's a big difference between taking objects of another culture and kind of how we can use them as decorative objects in our home, and when we live in the land of a place that has again symbolism or objects that are very important to it specifically. Because when we are living in a place, particularly if we lived in that place for a little while, and definitely when we die in that place, we become an ancestor of that place, so by living in a place, we are of the lineage of the peoples who have lived within that place. And this is a really important feature of ancestry that we need to attend to, and the idea of how living in struggle or in relation, and by struggle I mean staying with the trouble of the place that we live, but also being more completely in relation to the place that we are in, is a really important part of the work that we do whenever we are engaging with the ancestral. And some of that will come forward with this segment, because I want to speak about the importance that many groups of people have placed, particularly Scandinavian and Icelandic, and even some of the British Isles, but I would imagine other cultures as well have placed over time have placed a deep importance around establishing, nourishing the relationship that we have with regional spirits of the land that we live on, and also of the spirits of the home. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I wanted to bring that forward, just something to sit with and think about, that it's important that we resist some of the ideas of it, and move towards other impulses to be more embedded and related to the place that we're in. So on a broader level, we have been exploring the idea of developing kinship with the dark, and I don't want us to lose that thread while we're delving into some of the reasons why we also need to protect ourselves. But just like I said in the last video, there is a moving in towards the warmth of the hearth. And from that place, we're able to journey outward and deeper into the dark, and then return back to that special place where we are warm and protected and close to those things that carry life, carry that fire of life with us through this dark time of year. But we still can think about how we build relationship with the dark. And two of the words I like to use a lot is something that I've learned about the words kin and kind. That kind really refers to those that we are the same as. So with other humans, for example, other human people, we are of the same kind. Whereas kin is a much bigger word that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a blood family relationship, but that you have another kind of relational dynamic. And that can be of different animal people. It can be different spirit people as well. All kinds of people we can have, and also human people. Human people may not be of our kind in terms of our blood or of our lineage specifically, but that kin is a word that can be used to describe this. So we can think about how we create kin with the dark, and in particular with the non-visible. So it's not just and this is something that in future videos I hope to talk about a little bit more, but definitely within Icelandic pagan culture and surviving into later times within the cultures of Iceland, there is a sense of the dark as kind of being the mega relationship, or mega symbol, I guess is a word we might use, to think about the spirit realm in general, that it is related to the non-visible realm. And one of the ways that we can start to make kin with the dark is by drawing closer to any animal people that we might be drawn to participate with. So there are many birds, like owls, for example, or mammals like bats, or even dogs and cats, that have an ability, they have heightened sense of visual acuity to be able to see things that are very dark to us, but also to be able to navigate through space and place without the visual senses, with the auditory, and also more than that, with bats, so using echolocation, so they're making noises, and then they're able to build an understanding of the space that they're in through the reverberations of those sounds back towards them. So it's like a sonar type dynamic that's going on. So any of these animal people can also help us to start to understand our own ability to increase our sense of seeing in the dark, if you will, or accessing the non-visible. One thing that I had been sitting with around this is that sort of an story, or like a big story that I would work with around this, is the story of Odin, the Allfather, within the Norse mythology, and how Odin ends up giving over one of his eyes, and the eyes often represent the sun and the moon, within various cultures and within various kinds of astrology. And I recently read in a book by Fritz Fold called Troll Rune, which is a really marvelous book. I recommend it to anyone that might be interested in learning more about the magical culture of Scandinavia. But point being, he points out this idea that the eye that Odin probably gave up was the solar eye. He gave it up as an offering to be able to see it deeper into the dark and to draw closer to the mysteries of the North, which is the direction of eternal darkness, in various cultures. And um, as far as the northern hemisphere, there are many cultures that think of the northern direction as holding the powers of night, be they cold or darkness. So this idea of with him, the idea of the two ravens that sits on his shoulder being um, and also the two wolves that move with him, but how they help us to see that. And again, something we could fold in from an astrological perspective if we want to go there, that the outer planets are invisible to us on Earth. And it's actually has been sometimes astronomers looking at movements of planets that we have learned to see, seeing that something is influencing them that we don't know yet, to be able to find these sort of hidden planets, and this is still happening even within our solar system. So we can think of the outer planets also, even Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, particularly Pluto, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the future, but as representing aspects of the non-visible to us. So I leave you with that. There is something that I wanted to mention here to help us start to understand a little bit of my perspective around this, is that the Earth as a god or as a goddess has very, very powerful close connections with the dead and with chthonic beings, obviously, because the chthonic realm is really held in the earth. These spaces and the beings that inhabit those spaces, be they the dark elves, for example, or be they the dwarves, or many other forms of spirits, they live in the subterranean realm. But similarly, if we think about it, and something I think is interesting, which again lays with some of the cultures of the North, is that flesh has its own form of spirit. The body itself has its own spirit, but literally the bodies of the dead become the earth. And this is something that I think offers very simple access point for very deep, profound mystery that helps us to start to think with it that the earth itself is made up of the bodies of the dead. This hit me very strongly when I first moved to the south of England, where I live right now in Kent, and it was still warm enough to be able to swim in the sea here. And the sea here is a milky green color when it's bright out, when the light is able to enter into it. You see sort of this milky emerald green. And what is making it this emerald green is the chalk that is making up the cliffs of the land that the sea is coming into contact with. And chalk is a very purified form of limestone, and limestone is made up of the bodies of little organisms like plankton, but also other kinds of ancient organisms, So it's literally the hillside of where I live right now is made up of the bodies of the dead. And then when I was swimming in that water, and I reflected on the fact that I was floating in this sea that was infused with the essence of the ancient dead, you know? So just sitting with this, that when we interact with the earth, that the spirits of the dead, of humankind, of human people, but also of non-human people, and also of spiritual beings or magical beings, we might say, not just spirit beings, but magical beings like elves and dwarves and various other forms, that they are at home in the earth. So this is an important thing to think about. And something that I had been noticing, that I noticed a couple years ago going into November, that there are several holy days that kind of lay within modern context, or well, more modern, as in early modern context, that relate to certain saints that were important in Scotland that I know of, like Saint Martin. But there are others that have a relationship to this time of November. And if we look at the subsistence patterns of our ancestors that are in the north, at least, but I would imagine in various other places, it's just that's where I'm most familiar, is that this time, after Samhain, kind of marking the last of the harvest season, so the summer is ending, winter is beginning. Harvesting, we often think of grain, and of the vine, as well, if we're talking about different places where grapes have been grown, but also, other types of things that are harvested. But November marks the time when animals were slaughtered. This is when we sort of were going into a time of year where it wasn't possible, unless we needed to, be able to continue to feed animals throughout the winter as well, because as I had mentioned before, in the far northern regions, winter was a very fierce time, which was often linked to famine and to disease. And so because of that, extra care had to be taken into what animals were kept through the winter, and which ones were slaughtered, because we're coming off of a time of abundance when they've gotten the fattest and the fullest, and now we're slaughtering them. So there's a lot of slaughtering that would have been going on around this time of year as it moved towards the darkest moments of the year. So have a sip of this wine, because it's interesting how last harvest gives way to the last slaughter. And in terms of cultures where there was fermentation, beverage making, that was very important, we would often see that this time of year, this moment was marked by the first wines, that were ready. They were fermented enough to be, consumed. And so we have a lot of, and some of this will become clear when we talk about vegetal gods and goddesses of, say, the stories we call Greek, where there is a very strong relationship between the slaughter of the god, that's himself or herself, and the renewal of the cycle. And so anyway, point being is that this was a time when, if animals were being slaughtered, that their blood was offered to the spirits of the land. It was offered to the gods as well. But in particular, there seems to be a lot of evidence that most of the practices are really about the local guardians of the region, and this is something that's difficult. We kind of fixate on, a lot of people fixate on like a high form of paganism, and high paganism, well, maybe high paganism is the wrong word. Late high paganism, maybe is what we'd probably say. Um, but at that moment, we think of the big gods, that represent the big forces that are present within our world. But it often will eclipse the local cults, the very intimate village level kind of spirits that were very important to peoples, and also the spirits of the dwelling, the home itself. And to me, sitting with this idea of the dead becoming of the earth, we do see when human beings are first ever living in the same location over and over again, in a consistent amount of time, the dead start being buried, particularly the head of the dead, of your dead, is buried underneath the foundation of your house itself. So there's something about ancestry, the power of the dead to guard the people that are living, and how those dead become part of the spirit of the home itself. So most of us probably don't bury our ancestors under our house anymore. Most of us probably, that might sound a little odd, but if you sit with it, it is interesting to think about how much all of these various things sort of weave and entangle with one another. But the idea of offering blood as giving blood as an offering to those that have given their life so that we may thrive in the nighttime of the year, and particularly giving it to the guardians of place. This is an important thing. And you can see it in stuff that lines up around, say, it's already passed, but it still holds, like in the first few weeks into November, because this is when the slaughtering of animals would be happening for us. When we were more dependent on the seasonal dynamic around animal husbandry. But the idea that that blood served an important role in solidifying our relationship to these guardians and protectors of place, and also what is it that they are protecting us from. Because this is the thing, is that, again, if we know that the nighttime of year holds a lot of fear around famine and disease, we have to think of it in a more enchanted world. That this kind of force was also aligned with spirits that were malevolently inclined towards humans in particular. And a lot of effort does go towards, making good with those spirits that are aligned benevolently with humans, the human realm, to again keep us safe from the non-visible powers that would do us harm at this time of year. So this is why I said I want us to keep the invitational desire to befriend the dark, because I do think this is a very important thing, but also to realize that the nighttime of year does hold things and forms that are antithetical to human life. And part of us being cunning about this is to recognize when we need to be cautious, and how we need to be cautious. So I'm not advocating for fearlessness in terms of stupidity. I'm advocating for getting to know, making kin with the dark. And we'll talk about how one does that and how different eras of cunning peoples have done that, at the very end here. But if we look at a more recent one, which happens with Martinmas in Brittany, but also, so it's in various places in Europe, but then definitely I know it in Scotland. The idea that if blood was not drawn on Martinmas Eve, then the blood that is shed will be your own. So the idea that the home, what is the word? The person who was like the oldest member of the household that tended the household, so like the person who was in charge of the house. It was not uncommon even during Christian times and early modern times and forward up until not that long ago, actually, well into the modern era, there would be a bird, a goose or a pig would be slaughtered, and its blood would be allowed to drain directly onto the earth in the place that it was slaughtered. And that is an offering to the regional spirit, the spirit of place, of that home itself. Not just the home spirit, but of the land that the home is also a part of. And even if it wasn't very overt, that blood, the neck was allowed to bleed out onto the earth itself. And then some of that blood was taken and was used to bless the house. So it's almost like saying that blood, through offering, through the sacrifice, the slaughter of that animal, and its offering to the guardians of that place, becomes powerful, and it can be used to mark this. So they would often tie this with ideas around St. Martin, who is kind of like the first saint. He was a soldier, and he laid down his arms, and there's a story about him cutting part of his cloak, his Roman cloak, and giving it to a beggar. Turns out that the beggar was Jesus. So there's like a whole within the early Christian ideas around that, and that survived into modern times with the 11th of November being Remembrance Day for those who died in World War I, but any armed conflict as well, and the poppy as well as being an important flower because it was thought of as being the coming from the blood of those who had died in battle. So there's a lot of things laying around that in this time of year, so we can think about this blood, be it the blood of the grape or the blood of an animal, that it is being given in one honor of them and the sacrifice, their end of their life, to the lives that carry on, that thrive throughout this dark time of year, but also that it was about honoring those, honoring that connection, if you will. And so a saying would go like, as it was used, that blood was used to protect the home. I'm killing this in honor of St. Martin, and that he might keep trouble away from this house for the year, particularly for the dark time of year. So for me, there is a strong correlation between wine and blood, so I don't keep animals, but I do think that blood can act, or wine can act as a substitute for blood for the many reasons that lots of magico religious traditions are able to use wine as a stand-in for blood. So there's a rite that I'll walk us through a little bit that is I'm giving to you as a kind of a template to use if you would like to engage in this. But this idea of the house spirits, the regional spirits, and also family spirits, beings that have a spiritual connection with your own family, with the region in which you live, or the locale in which you live, and within your own house specifically. And you do see this again within various northern cultures, this idea of an overlap between these spirits and the dead. It's very difficult to know where one begins and the other ends, and particularly them being also of the earth is a powerful thing. So one powerful method that we can use that's present within a lot of the cunning tradition, both pagan and early Christian, you see speaking to all of these spirits in endearing terms. So it's almost like by speaking to them in endearing terms, we're able to then draw forth that kind of sweeter expression that they're able to give to us. And something about that makes a ton of sense, because when we do address and move towards even other people in a way that allows that benefic quality of theirs to shine through, we tend to do this. We treat them like an honored guest. We treat them like we would our own mother or grandmother, father or grandfather, or dear sister or brother, And again, what is happening there? We are making kin with them. We are recognizing a familial relationship. And in doing so, they begin to recognize us in a familial way, and they seek to offer their protection and guardianship of us, because of that. So in the rite itself, just like with the one that some of you might have done at the crossroads, I have a consecration aspect. My recommendation is to use a decent quality red wine. It doesn't have to be the most expensive, because we know, even as people that drink wine, that just because it's expensive doesn't make it high quality. So it's whatever that word means to you, but decent quality. We need a large bowl that is big enough for us to easily pour half the bottle of the wine into this bowl. And we need a small bowl or vessel that we can also pour a little bit out of this large bowl when it comes time for blessing our home. And you can include anything else. I encourage you to make this yours, and it's using the agla on tetragrammaton abraxas per dominum nostrum fiat duis luxunes in tenebris trinas consecration prayer that I offered in the same thing, because it's a very basic but I think very powerful form of prayer. So for this offering, we need to be in a place that it's ideal that's familiar to us and can almost be like a home or a portal for the spirits of place. And I give some ideas about where you might find that if you haven't already, such as an old tree that's nearby your home, or a large stone that's nearby your home, or, for instance, the bank of a flowing body of water that is nearby your home. Some of us may live in very urban areas, and if we do, we need to be a little bit more creative about this, but that doesn't mean that it's not there, You can also do this offering in using spirit vision, where you travel kind of in the initial phase of it to an area that you think is appropriate, and then later, and you can do it in your home, and then make the offering by pouring it onto the bare earth somewhere, like like a park. You can also do this. There is some precedent for you doing it in a graveyard. So I have some notes about if you choose to do it in a graveyard, then there's maybe a couple other things that we might want to consider about that there. So the idea is you journey there and there's some recommendations, but ultimately you're speaking to the guardian of the land in which you live in an endearing tone. And the more personal you make this, the more it is from your heart, the more powerful it will be. But I've listed some words which you're welcome to use there that you're able to do. And you, outside of protection and blessing, you may have some specific things that you might ask for. And people do, there are many reasons to think that these relationships can also be ones that bring good fortune, wealth, prosperity, health. You know, all of these things in a traditional enchanted worldview, they're all tied together to these beings. So, you know, make it express your intent directly in a heartfelt way, and it should feel personal to you. What is true for your life right now and the life of your families. Um, so the idea there is we're using wine of the harvest to be also representative of the blood of the slaughtered, and using it to then make as an offering to the guardian's place. And you're pouring it into this large bowl, at which point it's kind of got more surface area, doesn't it, to sort of allow the various ways in which spirits are imbibing of the subtle aspects of what you're working with to be there, you know. And a lot of these spirits, they have a retinue. So you may notice you're in the prayer that I've composed, you're speaking to a guardian, one, you know, but the idea is that you may notice a retinue of beings appear to you to accept this offering because they are the kind and kin of that regional guardian. And then when it comes time, you know, you're pouring it out in a very slight trickle. There's no reason to go fast on this, you know. It's like you're pouring it into someone's mouth almost. You know, you want it to have that kind of care that you're taking with it. And lastly around that is make sure that after you've poured it into the bowl and you're offering it that way, that you pour a small portion into a smaller bowl to be used in blessing your home. So when it comes time to bless the home, this one I suggest to do, which I think is true to some of the cunning practices of the northern cultures, to do this one in silence rather than a lot of praying and requests. And the reason that is that I think that silence carries so much power, and that power is something that we're able to draw forth by staying in silence while we do it. And you'll see you do it to the outside entry door of your home, or the doorsteps and the lintel of that door, and then moving forward around the various rooms, sunwise, clockwise in your house, doing it to the windows and the four corners of the door of the room. And again, since you're working with red wine, you don't need to, you know, take care and do it in the way that makes sense to you. As long as it's just enough to moisten areas, you're doing it. And lastly, if you have some left over, you can offer it to the spirit of the home, or the spirits of your home. And this is the thing I wanted to leave you on, you know, is that I have suggestions for how one forms relationships with the spirit of the home, you know, but there are many different ways of thinking about it. For instance, within the Hellenistic era, we have the agathos daimon, which is a very powerful form that is about a god, you know, that's very powerful, but also like the spirit of the house. You know, it's an interesting one how these are connected to one another. But this is what I mean about the personal family cult, if you will, which some people don't like that word, but the family magico-religious practices. Your home has a spirit, and if you live in an apartment complex of some kind, or if you live in a flat, that maybe the entire flat has a spirit that watches over it, as well as the one that is in your home. Um, so it needs to be particular to you. Some people, depending on their religious or their the icons that they kind of work with, there may be particular saints that already speak to you as being able to represent the guardians of your home, or angels, for example, that can act as guardians of your home. But in that way, they kind of take on the energy of the guardian of the home. So I think it's not necessarily you bringing something from outside into your house. It's kind of like they are merging together. Um, so it needs to be true to yours. I have always found that offerings of beer, and particularly ale, being a really good offering to make to the spirits of my home, and making it in a somewhat regular basis, using like a monthly cycle, like a lunar pattern that you think makes sense. But particularly the spirits of the home were given a lot of, just like the spirits of the region, were given a lot of emphasis, and can still be given a lot of emphasis around the night time of year. And the reason that is because it's a dangerous moment for us. It is a moment where things that are not necessarily well inclined to human life roam the earth. And if we are developing our practice as cunning practitioners, we need to learn to, one, keep our homes safe and keep ourselves safe, but also to learn to interact with these forms that are kind of on the edge of what is inclined to be in relation with the human. That is a big part of our function, and we're called to do this work. And similarly, thinking about how, for example, in Norse culture, the person who first farmed that homestead, their spirit becomes the spirit of the guardian of that homestead. So similarly, there are those who built your house, and maybe even back, built that place that is a home. That lineage of ancestor may have a place within who is this guardian of the home. So this is for you to try to open up, be present to that dynamic, speak to it in endearing terms, create a shrine to that spirit or collection of spirits. Maybe give it an icon of some kind, or even create, a fetish that is yours, an idol that represents, in like whatever form you want to make it out of. It's very important that this be homegrown, like literally. So anyway, cheers to you all. I really enjoyed one thing. I've really enjoyed the last couple weeks sitting with these ideas. I hope you get something from them. I would love to hear if you are even there. So you can let me know. Send me an email. Let me know how these things are going. If you have any questions, I am here for you to ask them. And I wish you well as we journey deeper into the dark time of year.